So what we're talking about tonight is very much a sort of continuation of what we were talking about a fortnight ago. And that was basically how to wake up muscles, particularly for adults who are starting or going to start on risdiplam. I've just got a message from Rebecca. Thank you, saying I was live. I did think so, but we don't always get the same messages sometimes on our different devices. So thank you, Rebecca. Nice to get the message. We're building on the idea of last time we were talking about waking up muscles that haven't done anything for a long time. And while that's very much true of a lot of the adults out there, it's also true of some of the children. If you're gonna be on drugs, type 3s who are maybe non-ambulant, and we're hoping for them to get them, they are really important for those type 3s, the younger type 3s who've got a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity to build muscle. And to be honest, you really need to start going as soon as possible. Now, I've just been talking to Andy about whether he's really seen much improvement on risdiplam. And I think adults, you've got to be a bit realistic about how soon you're going to see things happening, irrespective of what work. Although I've seen some amazing posts on Facebook pages of what adults are up to and the really positive bits about motivation. So we talked very much last time about just encouraging a flicker of movement where there hasn't been one before, and getting that flicker to actually produce a real movement. And we need then to build on these flickers. So that's not as easy as it sounds, because the difference between a flicker, just a tiny little twitch of your finger, and actually really having some strength in it, or your wrist, or think of something even bigger, it's going to be a big jump from what we were talking about as grade 1 power, a flicker of movement, to gravity counterbalance movement. Now let's just go through all these ideas of muscle grading again. So if we look at it from the point of view of bending your elbow, so that's bending your elbow up. So a flicker is literally when you can feel a twitch in your elbow muscle. And most of you will think that you've got reasonably good biceps, but actually it's probably pretty weak, because the muscle that you're using is the one that does that, which is not biceps, it's lower down across the elbow joint, brachioradialis. So if we're just thinking about this twitch that actually doesn't produce a movement, the difference between a twitch and actually then being able to go from a straight elbow to an elbow that bends up all the way to your shoulder is an enormous difference. So what we need to start thinking about is where the difference is with a grade 1 and what is a grade 2, and that's what we're looking for, and that's what we want to build up. So you've got a flicker of movement in your biceps, and then you've got a bit of movement. Now what we're looking at is the idea that grade 2 is gravity counterbalance. Now it's not gravity eliminated. We don't eliminate gravity. We're not on the moon. And people talk about gravity eliminated. Well, that would be lovely if we could all go fly in outer space and you'd all be moving around incredibly well. But while we're on the ground, gravity has a big part to play in how difficult things are. Just think about lifting the weight of your head. That is really quite a toughie. So that different parts of your body weigh different amounts, and so it's going to be easier and harder to move them. So we need to look at gravity counterbalanced. In other words, we are taking away the effects of gravity. We're not eliminating gravity, it's still there. So if I'm talking about my wrist, I would be talking about that is against gravity to pull my wrist towards me. If I want to make life easier, then I do it along a line where I'm not working against gravity. And you have to try and work these out for yourself. If I'm bending my elbow, my hand is working against gravity. So if I want to work with gravity counterbalanced, I have to work in this sort of plane. So you need someone, if you can't work out those planes yourself, you have to find a physiotherapist or an assistant or somebody who's a bit better at physics than I ever was, because physics was one of my worst subjects next to maths, to actually work out all the different positions. Now, it's not impossible, and I can certainly make a chart and we can stick it on the website that will show you the different positions for different movements. And that's something I'm very happy to do, and I will do before the next webinar. So we'll look at all the different positions that you can work at to get gravity counterbalance, and that's grade 2, and that's where we go to next. So that we're looking at all these movements that will give gravity counterbalance. Now, it can be, what we need to start thinking about is, what do we want to achieve with these drugs? We're not going to get cures, we're not going to get miracles. But if you have a goal of a functional goal, something you can't do, one step forwards, not a leap, but a step forwards, something that you find difficult with your hands, with your shoulders, with your elbows, something that you'd like to be able to do, maybe pick up a book. There are people who can't get their hands from their lap onto a table. A lot of people whose arm, if it falls off the armrest, can't get it back on to drive their wheelchair. Think of a goal-orientated way of working, because if you set yourself goals, small goals, then you can work on them and see where your progress is. If you're trying without goals, you won't really realize whether you've made any improvements, and you won't have any idea of whether you're achieving the functions you want to achieve. Now, as I say, you aren't going to start making leaps. We're not talking about somebody who's been non-ambulant for a long time or never stood for a long time, suddenly getting up in a standing frame, suddenly stepping, excuse me, suddenly standing where they were standing against furniture. You may not suddenly be able to roll over in bed, but it may be something that you want to start trying. Now, rolling over in bed is a big movement. It's not impossible. It needs some work and some practice, but you also have to think, on top of all these functional goals, are my contractures getting in the way? And if they are, can I get round that? And if I can't, what am I going to do? Am I going to have to say, we need to change the goal? We need to look at the contractures. We need to think how we can do this. Now, if you've got really bad hip flexion contractures, you are not suddenly going to start being able to roll all the way over onto your tummy, because your hip flexion contractures or your knee flexion contractures are going to get in the way. It is very hard to roll completely onto your tummy when you can't get your legs straight or partly straight. Can we do anything about that? We will come to that when we talk a lot more about contractures. But what I want to look at is how we get from that flicker of movement to a grade 1, a flicker to a grade 2. Now, we have talked before about the idea of sliding. A lot of work with your arms done with sliding. We've talked about using pieces of cardboard. Now, nobody can say they don't have pieces of cardboard, because you've all got your Amazon boxes arriving or whatever boxes arriving. So you've all got cardboard hanging about. Get the biggest piece of the box and use it to slide. If you find it's not very slidey, get the talcum powder out. Yes, it'll make a mess. It's not impossible to clear it up. If you want to learn to slide, get the duster and you can clear it up after you've made the mess. That's not the problem. Functional goals, bit of dusting, absolutely fine. We love it. So what you need to do is make life easy. Use slide. Nice, slidey, shiny surface, elbow backwards and forwards, wrist backwards and forwards. Now, we've talked about this in conjunction with the elastic bands, and you can use the elastic bands to take the weight of your arm. But if you're always taking the weight of your arm, you're not doing quite so much work. So this is not a situation where we are using the bands to take the weight of our arm. We're using the slidiness of the surface to move. And if that gets a bit easy, then get hold of a weight or a can a glass of beer or a bottle of beer and slide that around. You know, see if you can shove it down the other end of the bar. So there's all sorts of things that we can do as functional goals. You can get the salt and pepper and send them flying. You can be trying to move things around. One of the things we talked about was the upper limb scale. You could move coins around. You can try and move things from one part of your cardboard to another. Have a little go, make it into a game. If it's children, you can certainly make it into a game. Or get the Ludo out, or get the Monopoly out and start whizzing around the board on a board game. Don't forget, you've got 2 arms. You need to do it with both sides. I know that the rest of the players are not going to be thrilled when you're whizzing around the Monopoly board and knocking all their pieces off, but that's their problem, not yours. You'll have to think about where you can go with your piece, and they'll have to get out the way, or play sorry and just knock them out of the way anyway. Sorry is a bit of a problem because that's the one that's got that popper dice in the middle, and that's quite difficult to do. You might have to give it a thump. And that's definitely gravity assisted. So we've talked about how we can do this. Now you can do it for legs as well. All you need to do is get your feet in a position where you can do some sliding with your legs. Most of the adults I've spoken to are much more interested in what their arms can do, but you do have legs and you do have a head and trunk. Andy, have we got any questions so far? Because I'm going to go on to PNF and I might be there for a while.
No worries. Let's have a look. So we've got a request that you at some point do leg movements.
Yes,
so
I will do leg movements, not my leg movements tonight. Although what we can do is I have, like when we did the peanuts and balls, you know, I can change venue and do more on leg movements, maybe in unrolling in another session where we have more space to show you what's going on. But yes, we can definitely look at leg movements.
Okay, sounds good. Right, first question. Where do you start with grip strength?
Okay, now it's a very interesting concept, grip strength. In the normal situation, if you look at my wrist, that's my fingers. Now watch, when I grip, my wrist lifts up. So if my hand is flat or down and I grip, my wrist goes up. And that is a normal movement. That is a physiological movement. I don't control that. It just happens. When I grip, my wrist pulls up. And many people with SMA and other muscle conditions, when they grip, they end up gripping and twisting to get a grip. And what you're doing is you're reinforcing using muscles that don't grip. So obviously the muscles that grip are purely in your hand, but if they're weak, we will all do it. We will use other muscles to try and make the movement stronger. And the muscle that is so often overused, like the hamstrings in the leg, is this brachioradialis muscle. This one across your forearm, it's here, and it turns your hand. It comes from above your elbow. And what happens is, as you grip, you tend to grip like this. And that's why many people end up in that twisted grip position. And the other problem with that position, when your wrist is down, your grip is never as effective. You can't get your fingers fully into your palm to grip. So we have to think about how we are going to make our grip more effective. And one of the ways of making it more effective is somehow to get our wrist up, to get our fingers into that full palm grip. So you can either have your wrist resting on something, just happen to have a glasses case here, but you could put your wrist on something and practice with your wrist up. You can roll a towel under your wrist. Anything that'll keep your wrist up a bit will help you to more effectively practice your gripping movement. Now, if it's really severe, but the movement is there, and you're really having trouble, you cannot have a grip with your hand down. It does not work properly. And if it does, then all these muscles are overstretched and it's not going to be that strong. We need to work with our wrist up to get a good grip and to practice our grip, so that a little wrist splint may be something that you would consider. Now, if I said to you, you need to see an occupational therapist, a lot of the adults will say, ha, 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 haven't seen one of those for years, or the last time I saw an OT, they were looking at which toilet I should be using, not an OT who would actually do any handwork with me. Very, very difficult to find an OT who will work with you on hands, not because they don't exist, but because OTs are very, very scarce generally. But you do need to work with your wrist up, and that will give you better work on your grip and allow you to more effectively work your grip. And again, there are two parts to grip. There are opening as well as closing. And what some people have a lot of difficulty with is getting their fingers open in the first place, or a couple will come open and a couple will stay down, or you get the people whose fingers do strange things and they bend in the middle where they shouldn't bend, and things happen in your hands that aren't meant to happen that affect your grip. Now, when we talk about grip, everybody is thinking about what we call power grip. But there are actually many, many different sorts of grip. And it's not just about power grip, because actually in the course of a day, the power grip is the one you probably use least. So you may think that you're holding on to things and pulling things, but actually, unless you are doing transfers or standing or walking or doing something really big physical movements, you won't use power grip that much. You may hold it for a bottle to twist a bottle top off, but have a think about all the different things you do during the day, and power grip is not the most used grip of the lot. Okay, so the most common grips are pinch, one finger, two finger, and this is something that you can practice, pinching to different fingers. If your fingers don't move well, get somebody to bring them together and you try and hold them there. That is a really important thing to try. Get someone to bring it. Now, if you really can't hold it there, stick some blue tack in there. Seriously, stick some blue tack in there. Stick your finger down and see what it feels like to have your fingers in this position. This is back to the idea of waking up. What does it feel like to do that? But if you can get somebody to bring your fingers together and try and hold them there if they take their hand away, bring your fingers together. And this is something else you can practice. Now, there's another grip that you will use quite a lot, and you will recognize this the minute I do it. Key grip. Now, is that not the one that most of you use more than any other grip? Key grip or thumb grip. A very, very common grip. And that is something that most of you probably do not need any practice at. That's probably the grip you're all using most anyway. But there are still many other sorts of grip. There are two finger grips, there are gripping between your fingers, pinching when you're trying to keep, there's different parts of your hand that you're using for different grips. But the most common grips that you use are pinch and key. There are pencil grips, there are many different ways of gripping. But let's think about the pinching. That's one way to start. But again, look at my wrist, it's still back. And when I'm doing thumb key grip, my wrist is still back. And most grips get their power with the wrist back. So you need to be working with something holding your wrist back, as I say, either a towel. Some of you may have the bars to rest your wrists on for keyboard. glasses case, whatever, anything that'll keep your wrist up a little bit to help practice those grips. Andy, more questions?
They're flying in thick
Oh
and
dear.
fast. Yep.
Are we going to get finished again tonight?
Right, so probably some very quick questions to answer. How often would you recommend you do this exercise, and for how long each day? I'm assuming they're talking about the sort of grip.
Well, the thing is with grip is it's something that's very functional and something you could be doing most of the time. I mean, if you are working from home, you may stop every so often on your keyboard and do a few grips. It's one of those easy ones that you can practice. If you need help to do it, it may be that you need to get somebody to assist you. But there are two things that we know about exercise. You can't really overwork too much. You can't damage your muscles in SMA. That's the first thing, but you can fatigue them. So if you are getting tired, and you know, people will think, oh, well, they're only little hand movements. No, actually, your fingers can get tired. You will know that. Don't go to the point of getting tired. Go to the point where you can really start feeling things working. Give it a rest, come back to it. Hands are really easy to exercise. You can't complain that, you know, there's no opportunity. There's opportunity throughout the day. The problem is, as I say, either having somebody to help you or finding that you've got stuck, you can't get your wrist in that position, whatever. But, you know, you can add them during the day all the time. Don't, you know, just think exercise, think activity, think function, think grips.
There's a few people saying that they haven't seen physiotherapy or physios or any kind of therapy for a number of years. So now is probably a good time to remind everybody that we have the physiotherapy group, and to get people to sign up to the physiotherapy group. It's on the TreatSMA website. So if you go to the TreatSMA website and select on the physio button on the top right hand side, there is a link. The group is specifically for professionals, and it's Marion kindly is administrating it for us, but it's a great opportunity for people to learn some of the techniques that Marion's talking about.
I think the big problem is just finding the physios. And I know that while children find it difficult, adults find it impossible. And to actually see a physio regularly, you know, it's what we call crisis management in adults. If you've got a chest infection or a broken bone or a severe pain, you may get to see someone. But for bog standard general, if you see one once a year, twice a year, standards of care would say it would be a miracle for most adults to even see one twice a year.
Absolutely. And I think I probably went 20 years without seeing one. So I absolutely.
Well, if you speak to my kids, Andy, the ones I see at work, they'll tell you that you're the lucky one.
Right. Next question. Is it normal for some movements to be intermittent? Like, can you do something one day that you haven't been able to do for a while? The following day, it's more difficult again. Does it mean muscles are intermittently sleep/awake?
That's an interesting question, because I don't think anybody's actually studied that idea. The question is, are they working one day and then fatigued the next day? And that's a possibility. But the idea of an intermittent nerve supply, I get the feeling with SMA generally that's possibly not the case, but I would need to ask about that. But what we might be finding with the drugs is that the waking up is not uniform. Because remember, the whole issue with SMA is it's like the impulses aren't getting down the nerves. And we don't know exactly what the drugs are doing to the nerves to make them. We know that it's building up the protein, but what is happening in the actual nerve? Now, as I've always said, that I tend to look at the whole concept of SMA as though your nerves have a dimmer switch, and it's turned right down in type 1, not quite so far in type 2, and it's really not too bad in type 3, but what causes a lot of the difficulty as you grow, and these are for children obviously, is that height and weight make as much difficulty as the SMA itself. So while you've got your dimmer switch on a certain switch, if your bulb's not so powerful, or if there's a bigger room to light up, then it's all going to look a lot worse. But whether the muscles switch on and switch off is unlikely, because it's probably not the muscles that we're talking about, it's the nerves to the muscles. Because in the normal situation, your muscles don't switch on and switch off. Your muscles are always there and ready to work. So the question would have to be, why would that not be the same? The muscle itself is the same muscle, it's just not got a decent nerve supply. It could be shortened, it could be contracted. My honest feeling is it's more likely that if it's worked, that it is then fatigued and it wants to go into a sort of bit of hibernation for a couple of days before you can start working it again. But physiologically, I don't know the exact answer, I must be honest.
Okay, next question. Working hands and fingers using sort of the TheraBand type thing, what would be a good exercise for that?
Well, actually, TheraBand is probably much too big for fingers and hands. It will take the weight of your arm, but if you want the equivalent of TheraBand for fingers and hands, get a bag of mixed elastic bands. What you end up with, let me just get the scissors because that'll be quicker. Let's do that. That's something to practice. Try scissors, people, even if you start with cutting butter. Okay, so a packet of mixed elastic bands is probably as effective as TheraBand. You get tight ones, you get loose ones, you get long ones, you get short ones, squishy ones. I don't know, actually this bag is really old, so I don't know if I've seen a bag of elastic bands recently, but there's all sorts you can do with elastic bands. You can do 2 hands, thumbs. As I say, those thumbs probably don't need any exercise at all. This is a nice one where you've got it round your fingers. Now, this is a big, easy elastic band. It may not be easy for some of you, but then you might go for one that's a bit smaller and tighter, or you may get your long one, of course, and double it, like with the TheraBand. If you double it, you double the amount of effort you have to make. You can put it between 2 fingers. You can put it with your thumb in there. You can put it just across your fingers and leave your thumb out. You can stretch it that way. If you do it from thumb to finger, you can do it out that way. Now remember, I have said over and over again, one of the things about exercise is it can be hard work without producing movement. So you may have a fairly tough elastic band and put it around your fingers, and you actually can't move your fingers at all. They won't actually open like that. But just the effort of trying, just the push against the band, even if you don't get anywhere, is still work. So don't ever think that just because you're not moving, you're not working. And as I say, it doesn't even have to be you that's holding the band. It might be another person holding the band, so that they're holding and you're exercising one finger at a time, just by pulling down, just by bending, just by wiggling side to side. So you can use elastic bands exactly the same as you can TheraBand, and you can use it for your wrist as well. Don't forget that wrist. So you may want to look at putting it behind your hand and trying to pull your wrist up is another one. So my elbow is fixed. It could be down flat, and I'm trying to pull my hand up to exercise across the back of my wrist, because that's one that probably hasn't seen a lot of exercise for a long time.
So on that, Marion, because I have a very similar issue with my wrists, in the sense that they are pretty much limp. So if someone was to lift my arm up, my hand hangs down.
Yeah.
So obviously I can't put a elastic band on top of my hand and pull up because there's nothing. So what would you suggest, that kind of movement?
Well, the first thing is you say there's nothing. And this is back again to the idea of static contraction. There's nothing in terms of flickers, in terms of the muscle being switched on, or there is nothing in terms of movement. Because while there may not be movement, there may still be things going on. Now, remember, a lot of the muscles to the wrist and even the fingers are on the forearm. So while you may not think that something's going on, you really need to feel further up to see if there's any twitches. That's the first thing. And then, no, you may not be able to lift your hand up. Nothing's happening because, as I've said, that's against gravity. So you need to turn into this position and start with your elastic band going that way. And again, we're going to come to PNF in a minute, because to me, PNF is the best exercise in the world, but you need somebody with you. PNF is not a one-person exercise, it's a two-person exercise. So if your carers are around, if your spouses, whoever are around, if you're doing PNF, you cannot do PNF on your own. And this is the big problem with PNF. To me, it is the best work we can do, but you can't do it by yourself. And this is the same idea, Andy. What we're going to look at is the idea that you say your wrist hangs down. Okay, so are we talking about the muscles here being strong or gravity just hanging it down? So there's a difference between my wrist just hanging down with gravity or the muscles here being tight and pulling it down. They're not the same thing. So what we need to know is that a tightness? Are my wrists stuck in that position, or are they floppy? And that's what happens, because if they're floppy, then there's two lots of muscle we need to be working, the ones that are down and the ones for up. So there's a difference, and you need, this is why it's such a problem that people don't see a physio to actually assess this. And many of them see a physio anyway, and they don't get them assessed either. So we know that a lot of people see physios who don't do an awful lot of assessment. So let's think that my wrist hangs down like this. I have to then be aware, is it hanging down because it's weak, or is it being pulled down because the muscles are tight? The difference between weakness and contractures, and that's so important, because in contractures, it's much harder to effect a movement, whereas in weakness, we can get something going. So you say that you wouldn't be able to lift your hand up if somebody had a band pulling against you. Okay, so then we have to work on the idea that if we're in this middle position here, so that we've got gravity counterbalanced, I'm not working at all against gravity, can I do anything? Can I pull it in? Or is there no movement that way either? Can I push it out? You're saying not, because you're too weak. Okay, so then what we do is we work where we can see the muscles working. Are there any muscles working in that wrist? Do we know that? This is where we get onto PNF, and I don't want to start PNF unless if we've got lots of more questions. But so this is the idea that what you have to do is not move your wrist, but keep your wrist still. So if I'm going to work you in a PNF principle, I'm the person that's saying, right, don't let me move you. So your wrist is supported on a table, on something. You're resting in that middle position, if you can get your hand into the middle position, because obviously there's some people who are stuck in that position, but if you can get into a middle position, or we can get, this goes for the whole body and we'll go through it. What I would say to you if I was working your hand, I am in that mid position. So that's hand down, that's hand up. I am in that mid position, resting on the table, resting on whatever. And I would say to you, don't let me push it backwards. Don't let me pull it forwards. What resistance am I getting? You are not moving. You are keeping still. You are stopping me pushing you, and that might not work. So I might bend it down into the position you say it hangs and work there. And then say, okay, you're hanging down. Don't let me push it up. Don't, and see if that muscle is working at all. And we build on from there. Let's see what other questions there are, because as I say, I want to really go into PNF and get you all working on the idea of how that will help you.
Okay, well, let's crack through another few. Strengthening neck muscles.
PNF, we'll come to it.
We'll come to that. Haven't seen Physio forever.
Yeah, you have. You've seen me.
Absolutely. What have we got here? I have good days, like 1 or 2 days, and then I can't do anything for more than a week. Why? I'm guessing that's probably fatigue.
Well, it's like when you've had an operation, you know, it's the same idea. I don't know, when you've had an operation, like when you've had your back done and they've stuffed you full of painkillers and you feel great. So you do everything you possibly can. And then for 3 days, you're absolutely pooped and can't do a damn thing. And it is overdoing it when you feel good. And the idea is to try and keep on an even keel. So on the good days, don't overdo it. So hopefully on the not so good days, you've still got the energy to keep going. So it's trying to understand your own body balance. And, you know, on a good day, you do maybe go a little bit mad because you can, so that on the next day or the day after that, you can't. So it's finding your own body balance.
Interesting follow-up to that. On the days that we can't work out for whatever reason, is that likely to lead to a day where we lose muscle?
No, you won't lose it that quickly. You have to, the theory is that if you did 6 weeks of exercise every single day and then stopped, it would be another 6 weeks before you'd lost everything that you'd gained. So no, you don't lose it quite that quickly, because if you did, then all of us sitting at our desks, absolutely staring at a screen these days, instead of beating up patients, would have lost tons and tons of muscle. And hopefully I haven't. Although there are days when sometimes I think I've lost a lot too. But no, it's not quite that simple. If you miss a day out or you have a day off, you will not lose everything you gained in the last few days.
Okay. Someone here, 20-month-old type 2, doesn't use their arms. He's on treatment. How do we get them to put pressure on his arms? But I've got a feeling you might come on to that.
Well, no, actually, it's not. 20 months is too young for PNF, certainly to the arms. The problem is you have to find a way of finding out how we're going to manage this. When you say there's no movement, the first thing I would do, type 2, no arm movement. We've seen it before, but it's not the most common. I'd get the TheraBand out. But to be honest, if you've got a 20-month-old who's not moving their arms, get them in the bath, because you're not going to get them in a pool at this point in time. Let them lie down in a bath and splash their arms around and move their arms in the water, so that their arms are in the water, they've got their arms, the water's taking the weight of their arms, and start in the bath. That would be my first thought.
They've also asked about exercises to improve reaching, so I guess that kind of exercise.
Well, again, we're on slide for reach. If they can't lift their arm to move it, then make sure they're on something well supported. And it's really important, have we lost here, that when you are working, that the whole of the forearm is supported. You don't want bits hanging down or just the arm, or arm on an armrest. Get their arms forward, get a table or a tray or something right up to their chest. Make sure the whole forearm is supported and that you can do sliding stuff, because that's where you want to start with arms that don't do anything.
Right, last, it's more of a statement, but I think it's a fair statement that a lot of the adults probably feel like. Leanne has said, if only you could do assessments on us, Marion. I'm almost 42 and I'm not sure anything is likely to help.
Well, there are people sending me videos, so it's not impossible. There are people sending me videos. I can't do assessments on everybody, but I can certainly look at videos. And that's not a problem, which has just reminded me there is a young lady out there waiting for me to look at some shoulder exercises for her. So yes, it's not impossible.
But I think, you know, we've seen enough evidence on social media and everything else to show that adults can definitely benefit from the treatments. And we've got to also remember that you may be 42 and you're not sure anything is likely to help. But as someone reminded me recently, it's not always about improving, it's about maintaining.
Well, I think that's an important part, because we know SMAs lose upper limb function, 2s and 3s as well as type 1s, but the older you get, the more likely you are to lose arm function. Obviously, we don't know so much about the type 1s because we've not been in a situation where we've had lots and lots of type 1s as we have now. So we don't know what adult type 1s look like in the same way that we know what type 2s and type 3s look like. But definitely, we had a young lady with congenital muscular dystrophy, not anything similar to SMA, who could cut her own fingernails. And it was one of the few hand functions she could still do. And she said, you know, the scariest day of her life was going to be the day she woke up and found she couldn't do it anymore. And I know a lot of adults feel like that. And when you lose the ability to do something, the scary thing is, well, what next? What am I going to lose next? What am I not going to be able to do tomorrow? And you just sort of see your life trickling down a drain. And that's a real negative and really, really difficult to cope with. So it's true that, you know, one of the things we've got to be positive about the drugs is that they will stop that happening. When we used to go to Jennifer Trust conferences, those of you who ever came to Jennifer Trust conferences, and I'm sure there are adults among you who did, you know, I remember many adults coming up to me and saying, I can no longer do this, I can no longer do that. And it is a problem. It is a problem, because apart from anything, it does, again, it's not only a case of losing function, it's losing independence. It's more asking people to do things for you. Hello. We've just lost a fox and got a very chunky mega person with us.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't expect Ristoplam or any of the treatments to make you look like this.
And certainly not if you're a girl.
Well, yeah, that too.
I don't think I'd want to look like that, to be honest.
Right, I think that's all the questions for now. Should we crack on with PNF?
There is one other thing that I need to say on Leanne's comment, is that although the standards of care appear to only have been written about children, they are relevant to adults as well. So your local neuromuscular centre, and obviously we're only talking about those countries that standards of care are relevant and adhered to, but your local neuromuscular service should be adhering to standards of care, which says twice a year, that you should be being assessed twice a year. And I am sure the drug companies, if you're going on to Ristoplam, which most adults will be going on to, I don't think many will be getting Spinraza, but if you're going on to Ristoplam as an adult, I'm sure Roche will want to know how you are getting on. Because one of the things that NICE will do with Ristoplam, as they did with nusinersen, is say, we'll give it 5 years and we want to know what's going on. So as soon as the MAA comes in instead of the EMA or EAM or whatever it is, as soon as that MAA comes in from NICE, they will stipulate 5 years again. Now, don't start thinking, oh my goodness, in 5 years' time, they're going to take treatments away from me. On the other hand, do you really want to be pumping something into yourself that's doing absolutely no good? So we have to think that someone somewhere has to be picking up on all these adults who are then going to be going on to Ristoplam. And we need some assessments, we need some physios, we need to recruit the physios, because are they there to actually help you? Or does every adult neuromuscular service have physios? Probably a lot of them do, but do they know anything about SMA? And that's the other problem. Okay, so I want to talk about PNF. I will tell you once what it means and then forget it. It is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Now, the proprioceptive part is important because it's basically about feeling movement, feeling resistance, and you feel best, and this sounds awful, but I'm going to say it, skin on skin, which is not quite what some people might think of as skin on skin, but it means your carer, your spouse, your assistant, whoever it is, their hands on your body. And that bit of body ideally would be uncovered or not covered in tons and tons of clothes. Because you need to be able to feel what is happening on your body, on the muscles we're working, on the surface of the body that we want to work. So it's really important. It has to be two people. There are some PNF style exercises you can do on your own. And the easiest one, because somebody was asking about head and neck, and let's start there and work down. The easiest one you can do is push your head back into your pillow when you are lying down. Now, if you fix your arms on a surface, if you rest on your arms and push your head back, you will also find that your shoulders are working. And when you are lying on your bed and pushing your head back, if you can hold your hands together and do it, your shoulder blades and shoulder girdle will be working as well. And it is really, really important that you get some of this work. It's a lot of PNF is static work, not all of it. A lot of it is what they call patterns and patterns of movement. And we want to work in patterns, but that's a harder concept. It's much easier to start working on the static. And the idea is that you can do it easily by yourself, just pushing into the back of your wheelchair, into your headrest, into your pillow, whatever. But you can also push into somebody's hand. Now, what we then do is I put my hand, somebody puts their hand under your head on the pillow and says, okay, don't let me pull your head up. Don't let me lift it up. And you have to push hard enough to stop them pulling your head away, or tucking it down the back of your headrest, or if you're stable enough and you don't have surgery that comes halfway up your spinal surgery that comes halfway up your neck, then you can push. Now, with some people who have very high spinal surgery, it may not be the most comfortable thing in the world, but actually it shouldn't affect you. You have two different types of movement in your neck. You have your big movements, your gross movements, which are these great big ones, the twist, the side to side. These are the 6 main movements: side flexion, rotation, and not all of you can do all this, all the way back and all the way down. Now, very often, if spinal surgery has affected the movement, it's the one that goes all the way back and all the way down. But hopefully it hasn't affected the others so much. So that is the big movements of your neck. But then right at the top of your neck, where your skull sits on the top of your neck, you have all these little movements just of your head. And if you've ever seen any Bhangra dancing, you'll know exactly what these movements are. And they literally just move your skull. You could keep your neck completely still and still move your head. So you can practice those little movements because they just wobble you. So that is movement in itself, but they're much harder to control, those skull on neck movements because they are really quite small. So when we've done that one where we're pushing our head back and using all the muscles at the back of our neck, which are fine because they're the ones that lift us up if our head goes down. So that's those movements. Then we want to look at the muscles that bring your head forward. When you're lying down on your pillow, there's absolutely no point in saying, I need to work the muscles that bring my head forwards. That's not going to work because the vast majority of you cannot lift your head up. It's far too heavy to do that. So what you then need to do, let's bring me dolly in, is lie on your side. Now you have to do this in lying. It's quite difficult to do neck flexors in sitting. You can, and I'll show you how in a minute, but if you want to do it when you're lying down, what you're trying to do is go forwards. So I would put my hand on your forehead and get you to push into my hand. And if you can't do that, then I have to think the other way. So I would put your neck in bend and I would say, don't let me pull you backwards. Don't let me pull you backwards. Don't let me pull you. Now think about it. I am trying to pull your head back. You're trying to stop me. So you're going to be using the muscles at the front of your neck. So if you're lying on your side, because this is the only position you can get these muscles working for starters, then you're on your side and I'm saying, don't let me pull you backwards. I can bend you as far forwards as you can go, and I can bend you further back. And that's the other thing about PNF. You can work in different ranges. So you could start with your head down and try pushing it back. I can also, if you're down, say, don't let me lift your head, don't let me lift. So you can do it in sitting, but sometimes it's harder. Some people find it's a very choky feeling on your neck. So you can do it in side lying. You can do it in sitting if you've got the head control. But if you've got the head control, do you need your neck strengthening? And when you're sitting, I can say, don't let me push you backwards. Don't let me, keep it there. Don't let me push you. Now, there's a difference between push me and don't let me push you. When we're saying push me, it suggests movement. And when I'm saying don't let me push you, it suggests stability. So how we talk about this, what I'm expecting from you is different. Don't get too hung up on it, but we can do sideways as well. So when you're doing sideways, don't let me pull you this way. And again, you can do this in sitting or lying. A lot of people prefer it in lying. Don't let me pull you. Don't let me pull you. Don't let me push you. Don't let me push you. You can do it for rotation, but beware. Do not just hold the jaw. Hold the whole side of the face. Don't let me twist you. Don't let me twist you. Don't let me push you. And as I say, if you were doing the side, you could say, don't let me lift your head up. Don't let me lift. And that'll use the muscles there. There, I can say, don't let me push you over. And the same muscles are working in a different position. But you need hands on. It's no good just having the odd finger saying, don't let me push you. The more you can get your hand on resistance, it's partly the feeling that helps the work. Okay, any questions so far?
Rebecca has said she's getting palpitations just remembering this as a child with you.
Good palpitations or bad palpitations? Is that excitement or fear?
I suspect fear. I don't think we've got any questions at the moment. Okay. There's one other question around whether massage is helpful with any.
Massage warms the muscles up to start exercising. That's the best that massage does. It feels nice and it warms the muscles, it increases the blood supply, gets the muscles ready to work. But by itself, it doesn't do anything. But it's a great way of getting the muscles ready for an exercise session. It's also a great way of getting rid of cramp if you get cramp, but cramp is not that common in SMA.
Okay.
Feels nice.
I think that's all the questions we've got.
That's fine, not a problem. Okay, so when we're talking about doing patterns of movement, you can do patterns of movement with the head, but they tend to be total body patterns. And we'll go into the patterns of movement with the head when we're talking about rolling, because what we do with patterns of movements in PNF is we use either the whole arm, the whole leg, or in effect, the whole body. And it's actually big movements that you're controlling together. So we can do the same with arms in PNF. We can do it with hands. We can do it with wrists. You think about the movement you want. And we can't keep going forever because I've got to get contractures into all of this. So if I want to straighten my elbow, and straightening the elbow is a really important one because it's much easier to bend the elbow than straighten it. When it is bent, I can say, don't let me push you, don't let me push you. Now, when I want the elbow straight, I have to think about what I'm trying to achieve. There is no point in putting the work on the inside of the arm here if I'm trying to get you to straighten your elbow. The muscle is here, so I want to hold here and here. So I need two hands, ideally one on the muscle we're trying to get to work and one on the arm here. So I am going to say, if you are unable, Dolly is here lying down. If you are unable to lift your hand up towards the air, now that's anti-gravity, so it's a difficult movement, but I have to do this because it's the only way I can show you on the doll. So I would get you about here and say, don't let me push you down. Don't let me push you down. If we want to do it, we can do it in sitting. Don't let me bend you. Don't let me bend you. Now I'm holding over the arm, over the triceps. I'm holding at the front of the arm, giving as much stimulation as possible to the movements and the muscles I want. So the elbow's a little bit bent, and I'm saying, don't let me bend it. Don't let me bend it. You may not get the reaction straight away. We've got to get these muscles working. Got to get this muscle working. And the question then is, if this elbow is stuck in bent, how much am I going to achieve with that muscle? I cannot, if the elbow is stuck in the bent position, if I have an elbow flexion contracture and my arm will not straighten more than that, then I can't work this muscle. Whatever I do, I cannot work this muscle, this triceps muscle, to make it straight if that movement is not there. Now, several questions last time asked about contractures. You cannot make a movement happen if you are contracted. You can only work within what we call available range. So that if I can't straighten my elbow past there, then all I can do is work in this bit and try and exercise this muscle from there to there, because that's all it'll move. I can't make it do that if the joint is stuck. Simple as that. Now, by doing lots of movement, waking up the muscle, we may improve the range, but we are not sure. If it's been stuck for a long time, it will not happen. The elbow, surprisingly enough, in my opinion, is one of the most complex joints in the body. It does two things at the same time. It bends and it turns the hands over. Now, there's no other joint in the body that works in all that sort of very, very different plane at the same time. It's very, very complex. And if you look at the anatomy of the elbow, if you Google what's going on in there, you will see just what a strange joint the elbow is. Now, if you are looking to try and straighten your elbow, you can stretch it. Elbows do stretch, but only in one situation. If you want your elbow straight, you need to be able to turn your hand over so that you can get your palm up. Now, you may not be able to do that yourself, but if your hand can be brought into palm up, then you can stretch your elbow. If you cannot turn your hand over, you will not get a straight elbow. It will not happen because it's all connected. The movement that turns your hand over is linked to the straightening. So if your hand is stuck and will not go fully palm up, you will not get a fully straight elbow. So it doesn't matter what you work. But as Andy said, some of it's about not losing as well as gaining. And what we might do is, by building these muscles up, even within the available range, is help them to maintain movement.
Got a couple more questions, Marion.
Yeah, no problem.
You mentioned contractures. Someone's asked whether or not there are any minor operations that can help with contractures in adults, or serial casting.
Serial casting does work. Serial casting can work for knees and serial casting can work for feet. We can't serially cast a hip. It would be impossible. We can serially cast wrists. I have in the past serially cast wrists. I don't know if there are any physios out there for adults who will do wrists. I have never come across a child that I have felt the need to do their wrist. The problem with serial casting elbows is simple. The first is this idea that you will not get a straight arm if you can't turn your hand palm up. There is another little problem with casting elbows. You really are stuck if somebody sticks both arms in plaster. There is really not a lot you can do if somebody plonks both your arms in plaster. You can't scratch, you can't pick your nose, you can't get your hands to your mouth, somebody's going to have to feed you. So if you're going to have serial casting to your elbows, remember, do one at a time. It would be a little bit silly to try doing both. Is there an operation? Okay, let's have a think about this. Firstly, what is the operation doing? It is cutting a muscle. So it is cutting a strong muscle, which will weaken it. And we don't know if the opposite muscle will work to take over. So let's have a think about this. The elbow is very, very complex. Now, the problem with an elbow flexion contracture is that you will, if you've been here and you want to be straight, is there enough skin to stretch into a straight position? So it's not just a case of chopping a muscle. If I chop that muscle, I need some stretch in the skin to actually go all that way. It hasn't stretched that far for a long time. So is there enough skin? That's a simple but question that people don't think about. So that's the first thing you have to think about. It's not just about chopping muscle. Now, there is not one muscle over the elbow joint. There are lots of muscles. So by chopping one, will I solve the problem? People will ask about hamstring releases at the knee. Yes, you can chop hamstrings. I know there are some people out there, whether they're listening or not. It is painful. You need to be splintered. And you have chopped a muscle that ultimately, or lengthened a muscle ultimately. Why did it get tight in the first place? We have to think about what we are doing. Chopping muscle is not a cure. I know many children who have had their ankles, had surgery in SMA, and within a year, their feet are pointing down again because unless you are prepared to do lots of physio to work the muscles that pull the foot up and splint, because those muscles will be very weak, it will happen all over again. We had one young man who had 2 sets of operations, sat in exactly the same position. And we said, there's absolutely no point in doing these operations. If you're just going to sit in the same position and not wear splints afterwards, you're not going to get anywhere. So operations are only chopping muscle. They're not making the difference. They're not giving you power. They're not, if I had an operation to get my elbow straight because this muscle is doing all the work, this muscle isn't not suddenly going to be strong and be able to do that movement. It hasn't done it for X number of years. Why will it suddenly switch on? Because there is movement there. That muscle is still very, very weak. So unless you're prepared to do lots and lots of work to strengthen the movement and keep the range you have gained, the likelihood is every time you're doing that, you're just reinforcing the fact you're going to end up back there again. Does that make sense?
Does to me.
Good. Well, if it does to you, hopefully it does to everybody else.
Right.
Cutting muscles, cutting tendons is not a cure. It's a treatment. It won't stop the problem coming back. The only thing that'll stop the problem coming back is fixing the joint. That's not what you cut your muscles for.
Okay. Right, a couple more questions. Going back to the PNF exercises, particularly the head one.
Yeah.
So I asked how many repetitions would you suggest
Well,
doing?
again, you have to think, if your head is weak, you will get fatigue. Better to do 3 or 4 repetitions of this one and then move there and then do the backwards and forwards one, the side to side one. Try and get all the different movements in rather than concentrating on one and getting tired. The other thing is, as I say, what you have to remember with PNF, it's not just about working, push your head back, push your head back into the pillow. Then maybe try with 2 pillows so your head's a bit more flexed and pushing there, because you're using different parts of the muscle, recruiting different muscles. So the other thing you need to remember about your head and neck is that it feeds into your shoulder girdle. And if you're one of these people who's here all the time holding your head, you need to work that shoulder girdle while you're working your head, because it doesn't matter how much you get your neck, you can't actually work it properly while your shoulders are tucked up around your ears or really hunched forwards. So when you are trying to get your head back, you're trying to get your shoulders back as well. And this is back to the idea of patterns, that we're doing what we call an extensor pattern, that we're pushing backwards. Now, I know with the head, we want to come forwards as well. We don't want to bring the whole of the shoulders forwards, because this is not a position we want to end up in. So with the extensor patterns, and these all go together, and we can actually build these patterns together. So what you're doing is you're actually pushing your arms back. So if you're lying down, it's not just a case of pushing your head, it's a case of pushing your shoulder blades backwards and your arms backwards, and it really reinforces the movement. You all use reinforcement all the time. One of the things that we were saying is, when you open a bottle, how many people screw their face up when they watch your spouse or your partner or one of your other kids? When you open a jar, you screw your face up. Why do you screw your face up? It's not your face that's opening the bottle, it's reinforcement. It's trying to recruit all this muscle tension to help with the movement.
Okay, excellent. Another question: what exercise for the arms can we do for overpronation? My child's arm is twisted and overpronated.
That one. So that's that movement. There are so many people who are there. And that, as I say, is that brachioradialis muscle. I know these are all awful names, but they describe where the muscle is or what the muscle does. That's very often the case. It's basically because biceps is weak. This muscle that the men like showing off, the one that Andy's got tons of in that picture, this muscle here, that's your biceps, and that bends the elbow. Now, one of the things that we need to think about, and this is for the physios listening and not for so much for you, because this is more complex, is the idea that the muscle is there and it pulls up, but there's also muscle here. The muscle finishes here and here. So that muscle also pulls my arm in. So you can work your muscle at the other end. It's not all about what's going on at this end of the muscle. Don't forget that your muscle has 2 ends. There's only one muscle in the whole body that only has one attachment. And that's the one you do not need to exercise, or certainly no child under 10 needs to exercise, because it's the muscle you keep in your mouth. And it's the only one in your body that only has one attachment. Every other muscle is attached at both ends or down 2 sides. So this is the muscle that should be strong and is not. And the one that twists, I don't know if you can see that from here. If I try and show you, the one that twists is the one closer to my elbow. Brachioradialis is the one that twists. So there's 2 things we need to do. We need to work on rolling the hand outwards. If it's difficult, you're back on your surface and you're just rolling. I'm working PNF style. Don't let me push you. Don't let me pull you. I'm trying to work. The other thing that you can do is try working biceps. And what you're trying to do by working biceps is, instead of sort of getting hand to mouth, which is the classic brachioradialis movement, you are trying to get specifically hand to shoulder. And if biceps can start working a bit stronger, it'll take away some of that power off the brachioradialis. So what you will do is, and very often, and again, the physios listening don't always think about this, when we talk about bending the arms, that's not bending the arm, that's turning the forearm over. This is bending the arm, hand to shoulder, not hand to mouth. Don't come to your mouth, try and go to your shoulder, try and work your biceps. When you are seeing people lifting weights, they're not bringing them up to their mouth, they'd smash their face in, they're bringing them up to their shoulders. That's where we're working. And again, you can work biceps. Don't let me pull you down, but make sure you're headed towards your shoulder, not towards your mouth. Lots of work on rolling and turning. Turning, turning. Don't let me push you over. Don't let me push you. And don't forget, one of the problems is that movement twists the wrist. So be careful when you're working the wrist that you're not just getting the wrist moving without the forearm moving. So it's the forearm we're actually trying to move, not just the wrist. It's not just about getting the wrist moving, it's about getting the whole forearm moving against that work of brachioradialis.
Great. I think you're underselling your own biceps there, by the way, Marion.
Yeah.
Right, we've got, is kneeling good for kids? Some physiotherapists are strictly against it and others are for it. What's your view?
There's two types of kneeling. There is kneeling when you are sitting back against your heels, so you've got your bum on your heels. Now, the question is, what are you doing kneeling for? The other kneeling is high kneeling, and that's when you are upright, but your knees are bent. High kneeling is a great movement because it really works your bum muscles. So if you've got a therapy bench and you are working in high kneeling, that is a fantastic place to be, because what it's doing is it's working those bum muscles without the hamstring taking over all the action, because the hamstrings can't work because the knees are bent. Hamstrings work best in that position. So hamstrings can't work quite so well, so you actually have to work your whole butt when you're in high kneeling. If you're sitting back on your heels, you're not actually doing any work at all. And to stay in kneeling as a sitting or resting or working position, no, it's not a good position. So low kneeling, bottom to heels, is not a brilliant position. High kneeling is a fantastic position to be working at a ball, at a peanut, at a therapy bench, at a low table. Great, great, great position, high kneeling.
Awesome. Another really good question. This one's from Violetta. Do you recommend supplements like vitamin D or L-glutamine or I guess any of those muscle power?
I have no idea. I know people take the protein supplements. What's it called? The albumin, the whey proteins, and a lot of people take those whey proteins. I'm not a nutritionist, to be honest. It's something you would have to ask a dietitian or somebody who's got a much, much better idea of exercise physiology than I do. Because as physios, we never particularly recommend them. And you'd think that it would be a physio thing to recommend them if it was something that we felt would be beneficial. But I'm not aware of any physio recommending supplements as part of an exercise program. So whether this is just sport and, really like exercise as a sport, as opposed to exercise as a daily living task, I'm not sure, but I don't know any physio who recommends supplements as part, unless they've got a lot of sports involvement. And then unless you're into wheelchair sports or you are doing some sort of athletics, it's much more sports coaches that talk about these things, trainers who are into nutrition and physiotherapists. So I'm not the right person to ask about supplements.
No problem. So next question. Since starting Wisdoplan 9 weeks ago, I'm experiencing some core stamina, breathing, torso control, which is great. But I've also noticed wrists and ankles getting ever so slightly stiffer. Am I imagining this, or is this something Wisdoplan
No, it's not. It's not specific to risdiplam. It's like with everything. Unfortunately, the stronger muscles will get stronger. The stronger muscles are the ones that cause the contractures. You will end up, a lot of people can end up getting tighter. We have a lot of the infants on nusinersen who've got horrific hip flexion contractures, worse than we would see, say, in some of the type 2s. So some of the 1s are getting worse contractures. And the reason they're worse in the type 1s is because their hip flexors are getting strong and their hip extensors are not getting strong. Now, in the type 2s who were stronger in the first place, they had more muscle to start with. So the difference in muscle imbalance is less. So no, you are not imagining that your wrists and feet may be getting tighter. You must get on with stretching, and you must think about doing the opposite movements. So the strong movements, the flexor movements, the pointy toes down, you need all the opposite movements, working on those movements. And this is where the PNF, the exercise, the therapy bands, the hydro, the getting in the bath, and working the opposite muscles. If you're the 2 most likely things that you're going to find is that your feet are going to point down more. You need to pull them up. Your knees are going to bend more. You need to get your knees straight. Your elbows might bend more and your wrists might come down more. Everything that you can feel getting stiffer, you need to work into the opposite movement.
Okay.
Afraid it's one of those things we do see with all these treatments.
Fair enough. Last question I've got at the moment. Can you give us any advice on how to be able to open my mouth wider?
The problem is it's not, you know, what people forget is that you can have jaw contractures. It's not just a case of the muscle. You actually, your temporomandibular joint, which is up by your ears, which is where you get the crunching if you've got clicky jaw, you have a joint here. If you have not opened it wide for a long time, the likelihood is that the muscles around that joint can be contracted like they can be contracted around any joint, and they will need a gentle stretch. This is not just about the muscles. This is also about the stretching. So we have talked about this before there. I know that somebody's recommended something I'd never heard of, but the one that I know of is something called a TheraBite, which is basically like some sort of reverse clamp that you use to gently stretch your jaw. And I'm saying gently because you can have quite bad temporomandibular joint problems if you don't go slowly. Again, you may want some advice from a speech therapist or even your dentist about getting your mouth open wider, but it's not just about opening your mouth, it's about this jaw joint.
Okay. So I think that's all the questions we've got, and we're coming up to 25.
So one person last week was asking about scoliosis and contractures. Now, one of the things that we can do with this PNF is rolling. And rolling is quite a nice way of working it. It's not going to cure contractures, but what it really does is it gets that spine moving. And we can work away from the scoliosis or away from the way the spine wants to twist. Now, if I bring Dolly up this way, so Dolly's back is there. I know it's not skin on skin, but she hasn't really got skin. She's got a zip, so that doesn't really help. So what we do is the same idea. We do resisted rolling. So I can say, don't let me push you forwards. Don't let me push you. Don't let me pull you back. Don't let me pull you back. But then I can work on rolling in a total body movement where they're pushing into the rolling movement, pushing into rolling. Now, rolling from your front to your back is much easier than back to front. So we start that way. We start, come on, roll backwards, and I give some resistance, and I can resist at the head, I can resist at the shoulder, I can resist at the pelvis, I can resist at the arm, and I can resist at the leg. But the nicest way to start is head, back of the shoulder, back of the pelvis. Push, push, pushing from the pelvis, pushing backwards, pushing backwards. Don't let me push you forwards. Don't let me push you forwards. So you can do a lot of big rolling movements with PNF as well. It's not just about individual joints. It's about total patterns, total movements, getting going. Now you can do the opposite and come forwards. We don't want to get lots of flex movement, so we want to keep the body straight, and you roll what we call barrel roll when you're doing it all in one go, so that again, I can be in front of them, I can be at the front, and we can be working here to get the rolling forwards. And if there's a big problem with that, we can assist with the leg coming forwards. So as I say, one of the people last week was talking about the idea of scoliosis. So we can work against the way of the curve. Now, we're not going to cure anything. We're not going to suddenly make the scoliosis straight. But if we can get the back muscles working, if we can get some stretch in there, if we can get the spine lengthened and get them working into a longer length of spine. You know, when you twist your spine, it gets longer because any twist will make it longer. All these movements will help to keep the spine as mobile as possible, so that even if we don't cure the scoliosis, if we can keep the spine mobile, and as I say, you can do that over a peanut, over a ball, but you can also do it with PNF style work, making it fun. Don't make it a drudge. Don't let me push you. Don't let me push you. And the kids tend to like that, but you can do it with adults as well. I was working in abroad a couple of years ago, and I was asked to see a young man with limb girdle muscular dystrophy, and he'd never done anything like this, and he worked really, really hard at resisted rolling. And you know, he found it great fun because he didn't have to sit himself up, he didn't have to do a lot of stabilizing, he just had to push, pull, roll, because one of the things he wanted to do was better rolling in bed, and he was managing a lot more just with one session of PNF on his trunk. So you can do it for trunk. It's not going to cure contractures. Nothing is going to cure contractures except a lot of work, splinting, physio, possibly serial casting. But when you commit to serial casting, or when you commit to contracture management, it's not a case of, oh yeah, let's have one stretch a day. And then, you know, you've done your stretches once a day, and then for 23 hours and 40 minutes, you're back in the same position again. So where are you going to be with it? The whole concept of getting rid of contractures is much bigger than just doing a few stretches every day, I'm afraid. So there is a lot of commitment needs to go into trying to get a bit straighter. Questions, because we're nearly done.
I think that's it. We've got through over 40 questions this evening, which is,
oh my goodness,
impressive. I haven't seen anything else come in. So
okay, I think one of the things that obviously with Ristoplan that people want to look at, what I will do is, as I say, I will make a chart of the positions for anti-gravity movements that people can work in for wrist, for all different parts of the body. It becomes quite easy once you understand the concept of out to the side, back to the middle is always on your back, forwards and backwards is always on your side, and that's how you do anti-gravity. So it actually becomes quite easy when you get the idea of where the movement is, but we can make it into a diagram form. But the question is whether the adults are interested in legs and leg movements, or whether most adults are much more interested in upper limb and arm and trunk and head, because legs we can do, but if most adults feel that it's not a priority, then we need some ideas from people of where they want to go, or whether they want to go into the next level of exercise, and that is sort of more resistance and power.
Me personally, I've kind of forgotten I've got legs, so definitely upper body, arms, wrists, and that kind of thing is where I'm trying to focus.
Okay, so at the moment we've done quite a lot of work with adults. In a fortnight, I'm happy to go wherever anybody wants to go, whether we want to continue with all this hand, upper limb, arm, power stuff, or whether people want to divert to other things. So if people want to send in ideas to the group, then I will do whatever people feel is the priority for them.
No, that sounds good. If you can email us in, and we can put together some ideas and sort something out for 2 weeks' time. Just one other comment from Violetta. There's lots of people in here saying that these webinars are really helpful and great work, Marion, and thank you so much. One comment from Violetta. How do we keep our spirits up? I'm an optimist, but it's hard when I see no improvements.
Go back to what Andy said, that is just as important as no improvement is no deterioration. Be positive about the fact that things aren't getting weaker. Be positive about the fact that you're maintaining a level playing field, a level ground, a similarity. You may not see improvements because improvement is never going to be big as an adult, but this is why I said set goals. It could be tiny little goals. It doesn't have to be enormous goals. You know, one of the things about the upper limb assessment that we were talking about is little things like tearing paper, picking up coins, opening lids of plastic pots. Set yourself little goals of things that you find you can almost do. And that's the trick. Find something you can almost do, but not quite, and keep going at it, and see if you can suddenly do it. Don't pick enormous goals that will depress you if you don't achieve them. Go for something tiny that you can see there as a result. The opening the crisp packet, the opening the bottle top, you know, managing a whole bar of chocolate at one sitting. Whoops, was that an exercise? Yeah, possibly for those ladies among us. But, you know, even sometimes sweet wrappers. Get the box of Quality Street out and see how it is with those bloomin' awkward sweet wrappers. You know, the little chews. Go and see if you can get the top off of a chew. All sorts of things that you could try. You know, the other thing is clothes pegs. Get some clothes pegs and do some activities with clothes pegs. See where you get to. Don't get ones that have got really, really strong pin spring. Go for the cheapy, nasty ones that you get in the pound stores because they're much easier. They snap after a while, but you know, if the mere fact that you've snapped it is probably positive because you've got the power to do it. Find a load of toys. Get cotton wool balls and just lift them up into a pot. Anything where you can see a bit of achievement. If you really want to work at doing something a bit different, you could time yourself or have numbers of things. You know, you've got a cup and you've got 10 cotton wool balls. How long does it take you to put them in? You may want to do little things where you're giving yourself little time goals, little number goals. How many can you do in a minute? How many coins can you pick up without dropping them out of your hand? All sorts of little things that don't have to be spectacular, but enough for you to know that you've done something better than you did last time.
And I think just to add, you know, don't beat yourself up about it. I mean, I'm in my 40s. I've just started treatment. I'm not expecting any miraculous improvement overnight. It is about just maintaining where you are now. We haven't had treatment for SMA for so long, and now we've got an opportunity to at least stabilize the condition, which is a massive, massive benefit to all of us. So just try and focus on that.
The other thing is, for those of you who maybe aren't on treatment, I know it's not common among adults, but if you are somebody who gets a lot of fatigue, you could still think about salbutamol. It doesn't work for everyone. A lot of people don't like it, but a lot of people do find that it gives them more stamina during the day. Now, I know there have been problems with getting oral salbutamol and that your physician may not approve because it's not actually registered for treatment as a treatment for SMA. Many of the children are offered it, but it's something that you could consider and speak to your physician about if you find that fatigue is a big issue.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's we'll call it a night there, Marion. Thank you very much.
Okay, no problem. We will see you in a fortnight with some ideas of what people want to hear then.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Marion.
Lovely. Thanks a lot, Andy. Thanks for the lovely physique that we were treated to tonight.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you've got to try, haven't you?
Oh, it's impressive. It is so impressive. Lovely. I wonder what Marnie will come up with next time.
All right, take care.
All right,
Speak
speak to you
again soon.
soon. Take care. Bye.